fix my other two too.
Hey, Pat, do you mind saying hello really quick? I just want to do one more sound check here.
Hello, good evening. This is Pat.
That was excellent, Pat. Thank you. All right. Well, let's do it. Are we good? Ready?
Yeah,
All
ready
right.
when you are.
Okay. Oops. This. Do you want to press record? Hey. All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. And thank you so much for joining us here at the Lagoon House. And thank you to everyone that is joining us online through Zoom. Okay. For those of you that are joining us through Zoom, you will note that you do not have access to your mic or to your video. This is through the Zoom webinar platform. So please submit any questions you have through the Q&A option located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any other comments or you want to say thank you for a fantastic presentation, please use the chat option. For those of you that are here joining us in person, we have note cards located at the back of the room with pens and pencils. If you have any questions, please write them down on those note cards. Cara will be walking around collecting those cards, and we will be answering your questions at the end of both Dr. Leesa Souto's and Pat's presentations. Excuse me, Pat Rose's presentation. All right. Let's see. The presentation will be recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube in the coming days. Those that have registered, you will receive the Zoom link through your email. And those of you that are in person here, there are Lagoon Loyal QR codes around, excuse me. You will receive the Lagoon Loyal QR code through your email, and then you will also receive the Lagoon Loyal QR code here in person. Okay. All right. We're looking, give me one moment. We're waiting for Dr. Leesa Souto to come up. But again, we are so thankful for everyone to be here today. And we are really looking forward to your questions and sharing more information about the lagoon. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Leesa Souto. She is the Executive Director of the Marine Resources Council. She grew up in South Florida after completing her bachelor's degree in biology at Florida State. Then she moved to Brevard County to help protect and preserve the natural beauty of this area. While here, she received her doctorate from UCF with an expertise in urban ecology that links human geography, structures, and behaviors to water quality impact. Her research focuses on groundwater impacts to the lagoon, muck management strategies, fertilizer, and alternative landscapes. Her professional career spans over 20 years, working to improve Florida's water quality at Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Brevard County Natural Resources Management Office, and UCF's Stormwater Management Academy, and of course, the MRC. She loves the water and exploring new ecosystems in Florida and around the world. So without further ado, Dr. Leesa Souto.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for everybody out there in the Zoom world for participating today. My name is Leesa Souto. I'm the Executive Director of this fine organization, the Marine Resources Council. I'm going to talk today about a little bit about what we do, but mostly about our precious estuary and what's going on with it. And then I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Pat Rose, who is going to be joining us via Zoom. He's up in Tallahassee. Planned to be here today, but wasn't able to. And so because of Zoom, we're able to still get him here, even though he won't be in person, but he will be able to participate in the discussion and answer questions at the end. We do have cards. Did you talk about the note cards? Okay, to write your questions on, and we'll address them all at the end of the presentation. So again, thank you so much for all that you're doing. Thanks for supporting MRC, and thank you for being here. So the Indian River Lagoon. Oh, and maybe I should turn it on. Marine Resources Council is a charitable organization that was started by a group of community leaders, professors at FIT, Florida Seagrass, and Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, worked with community leaders to start an organization that was going to enable the citizenry to do science, because they thought that if citizens were engaged in science, they were going to have a heightened understanding of what was going on with the lagoon that would give them voice. So the power of science in advocacy, and that's still our byline today, science to action. It's looking to do that actionable research that is going to advise policy, evaluate program success, and direct, making logical decisions based on scientific evidence. That's been really pretty much the reason we were founded. And our very first program was a citizen science program. Lagoon Watch is celebrating 30 years this year. So we've been at this for a while, and we do our mission of protecting, restoring the Indian River Lagoon through 3 program areas: education, restoration, and science. We're located here at the Lagoon House in Palm Bay, right where that star is on the map. And we get to occupy this beautiful building that we leased from the city of Palm Bay here at the Lagoon House. So we're very fortunate. I'm going to give a couple of brief slides overviewing our program areas just to give everybody some understanding of what we do here. We're about to launch our summer camp next week. We're really excited about having this beautiful space filled with smiling young people's faces, learning about the lagoon, getting engaged. So we do school programs, we have summer camps with kids. We even did a very short, very small summer camp during the COVID time last year. We had a safe place for kids to get out of the house finally, come and explore the lagoon. Their parents were so appreciative. We just did a short day. We only had 6 kids so they could be safely distanced away from each other, but they were just so glad to be out of the house, as you can imagine. We do our Lunch and Learn webinars is the first Tuesday of every month. We've, of course, converted those to Zoom. And we do rain barrel workshops, and we do a lot of other kinds of conferences. And I'll be talking about our new conference this year, the LID conference. We'll be going to be holding in October in Rockledge. Restoration, and forgive me, education. I should introduce Nicole Broquet as our Director of Education. You met her a few minutes ago. And Angie Oswald is the director of our summer camp program. She recently joined our team, retired school teacher, and she's brought all of that incredible experience and knowledge to our summer camp. So it's going to be a really amazing camp. If you know young kids, age 8 to 11, I think we still have a couple of sessions open, but they're filling up fast. So restoration, this is the purview of our Director of Restoration and Science, Ms. Katie Savoya, who is on her way to Hawaii. So she's not here to be recognized today. We're all jealous, she's responsible for this area. We have a licensed mangrove nursery down in Sebastian as our main property. What you see here is kind of our education nursery. This is where you can come and learn how to pot mangroves, learn about mangroves. If you're growing mangroves, you can bring them here and drop them off. There's a place out there to drop off mangroves. So we have our licensed mangrove nursery is down at our Sebastian property. We have planting workshops on Saturdays. You need to check our schedule to see when they're being offered again. We, of course, slowed those down during the COVID time, but they're starting back up again. We do a lot of shoreline restoration. If you didn't have a chance to go down and explore our trail that goes down to the shoreline, hopefully, well, it might be dark after this, but probably not, because the light is staying light so long. After the presentation, if you get a chance to stroll down there, you can see right at the base of the stairs are these UF created oyster prisms, they're called. They're made out of concrete. So we're testing those. We're testing different types of rock materials and different types of media that could be used besides plastics. We don't want plastics with oysters in the lagoon. We want other types of materials that will attract oysters and other types of filtration feeders, not just oysters, to our shorelines. So we're testing them down there. You can go take a walk down there and see the incredible amount of wetlands that have actually been built, that have accreted sand, built sand behind those bars. So we're doing a wonderful thing with our shoreline down there. And we still manage, MRC was responsible, our founding executive director, Diane Peril, was responsible for creating a blue waste plan that included thousands of acres of buffering land to protect the lagoon. And then we went forward as an organization, writing the Florida Communities Trust proposals to acquire those properties. Most of them now are in the management regime of cities and counties or the state. We still own and manage 52 acres that are MRCs. So we do that too, and that's all under Katie. And then under science, which is part of Katie's purview, we have our awesome Lagoon Watch program, and that is Cara Woods. If you haven't had a chance to meet Lagoon Watch coordinator, Cara Woods, and if you're a Lagoon Watch volunteer, there she is. You've probably heard from her, get a chance to chat with her. Lagoon Watch has been 30 years of data collection weekly by volunteers like you. Fantastic program. We've got many, many, many more data thanks to those individuals dedicating all that time and effort collecting these important parameters in the lagoon. Muck Finders is another citizen science program that uses volunteers to go out and measure the depths of muck in the lagoon. And then it's mapped through GIS, analyzed spatially, and then we use it to advise the county and city how to manage muck better. They want to try to use their best bang for the buck, so knowing where the muck is, how the muck's moving, how deep is the muck, what's the volume of muck is important. And then we're doing groundwater pollution study. This is my favorite. For about 4 years now. I started it when I was a research faculty at FIT, and then we brought it here, and it's being continued still by the county. The question that we're trying to answer really is which types of communities have the worst polluted groundwater underneath their community. And then secondly, if people are retrofitted, so if they're taken off of septic tanks and put on into sewer, what is that going to do in terms of reducing the amount of pollution in the groundwater? So it's being used to prioritize where to remove people from septic tanks and then evaluate the success of those programs. Actionable research. I mean, research is fun. I love research, but we can't do research just for fun anymore. It has to be to answer some of these questions and to evaluate the success of what we're doing. We don't have the luxury of just, doing research to figure out why mullet jump anymore. It needs to be things like, what's working and what's not working. We need to focus our scientific efforts to problem solving. We're just started we're very fortunate to have a partner in Surfrider who started to do bacterial testing a couple of years ago and showed us what an incredible issue we have with bacteria in our tributaries. We approached them to build our Lagoon Watch program to add bacteria. We just received funding from, we received the benefit of beneficiaries of somebody's estate who passed away. And she indicated that she wanted the money to go to Lagoon Watch. So we said, well, she wants the program to build. We want to add bacteria. We're going to use her money for that purpose. So we went ahead and bought the IDEX machine. And we're moving forward when we're working closely with our Space Coast Surfrider to make that happen. So we'll be sharing our volunteers, sharing our experiences and our data to really try to understand the extent that wastewater and other contaminants coming from wastewater are coming down our tributaries and impacting the lagoon. What I'm going to talk about, and really kind of the take-home message and what you're about to hear is just a reinforcement of the obvious. I mean, everything is connected in nature. Back in 1911, John Muir said it best. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it is hitched to everything else in the universe. So when you start messing with one thing over here, it's going to have an impact that nobody can predict. It's way too complicated an ecosystem to understand how things are going to be affected by a little tweak here and there and there. We made some huge tweaks to the system, and so we're seeing how that effect is cascading through those connections. So connections within nature, and then connections with nature. So we are connected to our waterways. I love the water. I'm sure many of you do. And so we have an emotional connection. We love to be near the coast. Most humans love to live near the coast if they can. We love to fish. We like to play. We like to just enjoy the pastoral pleasure. We are emotionally connected to the coast. And we're also physically connected to the coast. In Florida, there are, I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong because I don't have them on my hand right now, but about 25,000 linear miles of creeks and rivers and 47,000 linear miles of canals. So this state is being drained literally from the center to the coast in every direction through this incredible series of canals that we have created to build here. We couldn't build in a swamp. We had to drain it first. Those canals are now the thoroughfare for all those pollutants coming all the way from Orlando and inland and everywhere in between to reach our coast. They get there through a series of channels, going into streams, going into rivers, going into tributaries leading to the coast on both coasts. So wherever you are, people think that I live way out in West Melbourne, I couldn't possibly have an impact on water quality. Well, yes, you are connected to the lagoon by the Melbourne-Tillman Canal. Wherever you are, there's a canal somewhere nearby that's going to drain your yard and what you're doing on your landscape into the coastal waters. So we are literally connected. And there's no better visual interpretation than that picture over there on the right of the screen. I mean, that's at the southern end of the lagoon, where you can really see that these houses are built literally right in the middle of a wetland. And those people are, intimately connected, but we're all that intimately connected. Comes through the rivers. This is the Lake Okeechobee discharge down at the St. Lucie estuary. Comes in fast and furious and horrible, and it kills everything. That's an example of a tributary discharge. These are pipes, that are releasing wastewater, stormwater. Everything is just kind of coming in, it's getting channeled in through one source or another. And this has been the effect. We're watching our lagoon changing. So it's not changing for the better. It's definitely changing for the worse. The deaths of manatees, this was 2013, headline in the New York Times. This was when the manatees, dolphins, and the diving birds were dying in 2013, and they were already talking about us as having an estuary at risk. So I think there's no doubt. So since then, we've actually seen things get worse. And we started in 2010, 2011 with what we named the first algal super bloom. We had no idea it was going to get way worse. We thought that was the worst algal super bloom we'd ever seen. They've been much worse since then. That super bloom triggered our first huge manatee mortality event here in 2013, and it was accompanied by a dolphin die-off and diving birds. So this kind of crazy combination of pelican mortality, marine mammals, and birds just, really made people scratch their heads. Like, what is going on that's killing not only the manatees and the dolphins, but the pelicans and other wading birds? It's very unusual. 2015, we had that big brown tide event that when it died, it caused a megalithic fish kill in 2016, early 2016. I'll never forget that day. 2017 was when we had the full year of Lake Okeechobee discharges. They call it the lost summer down at the south end of the lagoon. And then this year in 2020, really the December of 2020 through the current time, we're experiencing what has now, we know, is the worst marine mammal mortality event in history, with the lagoon losing a huge die-off of manatees. We know now the number is over 600 manatees in the state that we've lost in just 2021, and that the majority of those have been on the east coast of Florida in the lagoon. And I think around 300 or more now are just in Brevard County waters. So it's definitely, it's definitely happening here. So what is the problem? It's about pollution, right? So where is all this pollution coming from? Nutrient pollution, it comes from everything. So in these different types of land uses, like agriculture and livestock, you're going to see pesticides and chemicals, fertilizers and chemicals used for weed protection, insect control, and so on. They're all can run off of the surface through canals, or they can percolate in through sandy soils and end up in canals that will eventually discharge to the rivers that are going to end up in our estuaries. Residential runoff, same suite of chemicals, similar type of chemicals are applied to people's lawns. Additionally, other animal waste I didn't talk about, of course, with livestock and farming, you've got tremendous amounts of animal waste to deal with. Residential runoff is very similar to that in smaller scale, but there's way more of us in the residential land use than there are in the agricultural land use. Septic systems and other toxins that are percolating through the sand and going into groundwater. Septic systems by design discharge nutrients into the groundwater. That's what they're designed to kill bacteria, but they discharge the nutrients. So those are contributing pollution and nutrient contamination to the waterways as well. Once those nutrients, fertilizers and so on, nitrogen and phosphorus, get into the estuary, they fuel algal blooms, just like they would help grow plants, they help grow algae. So the algae starts to grow. And then when the algae reaches its full potential, so to speak, the bloom has exceeded its capacity, it's going to die. When it dies, the bacteria in the water will break down all of those billions and billions and billions of alga cells, and that process takes the oxygen out of the water column. So what actually kills the fish is they suffocate because there's no oxygen left in the water column. It's like a drop in dissolved oxygen. And then we have fish kills. And then when the fish die, they fall to the bottom and rot, and they release all that ammonia and all of that phosphorus, and it fuels an algae bloom, and we end up in the cycle. And that's where we are. We're in the cycle. We need to break the cycle. Also, on top of that, down here at the bottom is that lovely black ooze we call muck. And that is formed by dead decomposing matter, dead alga, sediment coming into the storm drain. It's just like an organic ooze on the bottom, and it's off gassing back into the water column, pollution like nitrogen and phosphorus. So it needs to come out. So there's like 1,000 points here to address. We don't have a silver bullet. We got to deal with all of this. We have to deal with this runoff. Oh, I forgot to mention, it's also raining out of the sky. The sky is now raining nitrogen and, of course, mercury also. So we have to deal with that too. But these two, runoff is in the stormwater world, septic, and then wastewater, which also is piped underground. Those pipes can leak as well. Those are in the groundwater realm. So wastewater, stormwater, and human behaviors. Now I'm going to change a little bit, talk about the report card. So hopefully you all got a report card. Report card is a tool to really answer the question, is the lagoon getting better? We knew this was going to take a long time. We know that this took a long time for it to get this bad. We've got a system that's incredibly resilient. It's going to want to try to come back to where it was. And if we just give it half a chance, it's going to do that. So we want to see that happen. We want to see every year that we're going to start to gradually get a better score. Our grade is going to go up. And I'm happy to say that our grade actually did go up. It went from an F to an F+. And I know that's a hard thing to explain to mom or dad if you get on your report card at home. But, in our case, it was a 6-point increase across the whole lagoon. That's good. An F+ is good in our case. Yay, it's a good thing. It's going in the right direction anyway. But what we did with this report is we are looking at state standard and state data, and we're comparing them and then standardizing what the difference is into a score. It's pretty much just a math equation. And then, so we're comparing the states. So this is really a grade for how well our state is handling its estuaries, both in terms of how much they're monitoring it and where they've set their regulatory targets. There are only 5 targets, so that's 1 point, and that's one of the things I think we need to start rallying about. We need to be looking at more things in the lagoon, more contaminants, more types of pollutants than just these 4 contaminants or 4 conditions and seagrass. So these are the 5 targets that the state has created. 2 of them are the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and this is total nitrogen, total phosphorus. Chlorophyll A is a measure of how much algae is in the water column for the most part. And then turbidity is a measure of how unclear the water is. You can see how they would relate. These two, we would expect that when these increase, chlorophyll A would increase and turbidity would increase. These would all be related. Seagrass is the only habitat indicator that the state is looking at to determine the health of the system. Seagrass is impacted by turbidity. So the cloudier the water is, the harder it is going to be for seagrasses to grow. In the scoring, we create a water quality score where we just average these 4 things, and we create a seagrass or a habitat score by just looking at the seagrass data, the seagrass score. And then the 2 together are what makes the grade. And then we grade each region. We grade there are 10 regions that have 10 different regulatory targets. So we have to do all those calculations 10 times because those targets are different. And so that's why they're graded differently. The Mosquito Lagoon has 3 different targets, 3 different regions. The reason why they have 3 different targets is because the Mosquito Lagoon is so different from north to south. The ecosystem, the ecology of it, the water depth, the retention time, the vegetation type, at the farthest northern end of the Mosquito Lagoon, you start to see more salt marsh. At the southern end is where we've got our seagrass flats, typically. Very different system. That's why it needed 3 different targets. That's the rationale of the state doing it, which makes it scientific. It makes perfect sense. The North Indian River Lagoon has its own targets, the Banana River. Central IRL has 2 different targets, north and south. And then the South Indian River Lagoon has 3 different sets of targets. And if a score of 80 is what we set as meeting the standard. So if the target actually met the standard, then we gave it a B, we gave it an 80, because we're hoping that things get better than that, and things can certainly get worse, because that's pretty much what we're looking at. We also added the tributaries. We know that the tributaries tell the story. We know that tributaries are where all that pollution enters our coastal waters through the tributaries. And so we've added the tributaries to the lagoon. On the report card, you will see there are two different sizes of bubbles with grades in them. The big bubbles are the region scores, and the little bubbles are the tributary scores. So these are the 11 tributaries from north to south: Turnbull Creek, Big Flounder, Horse Creek, O'Galley, and Crane Creek. And then over here, Turkey Creek, Goat Creek, the Sebastian River, which actually has 3 different prongs, Taylor Creek, the St. Lucie, which I think has 5 different prongs, and the Loxahatchee. So now I'm just going to go through a few slides. You see these in the report card. The Mosquito Lagoon, North Indian River Lagoon, Banana River. Up here, this grade, part of the reason that this grade is so good is because there's no seagrass up there, so it doesn't have a seagrass score. So just remember that. The seagrass is what's bringing these scores down. The lack of seagrass is what's bringing these scores down. So there aren't seagrasses up here. So that's why they look so good, because it's only water quality that we're looking at in that grade. It's the only, the tributaries are also only water quality. There's no seagrass in the tributaries. So this one, Ponce Inlet, is all the way up here to give you an idea of where we are. Titusville is here. The North Brevard metropolitan area is about 145,000 people. Just give you a sense of the population dynamics and the amount of development in that area. Not a lot, especially not up in here. You know, this Volusia County, South Volusia County area is very sparsely populated. It's an interesting phenomenon to understand what is going on down here. The only thing that's really here, what's here? You guys know what's here? NASA. So NASA, KSC, there's not really much development in this area. It's interesting. Central Indian River Lagoon, north and south. It goes from, where are we? So Central IRL goes from about the Melbourne Causeway. It's what we're looking at here, from the Melbourne Causeway down to the Indian River County line. So the regions are colored, they're averaged out. All the data are averaged for the region. The water quality doesn't really, change extremely right at that line. It's just a manifestation of the mapping and the region being colored in. But the Central Indian River Lagoon, Melbourne Palm Bay area, we're looking at a population of about 200,000 in here. And then down here, the entire county of Indian River County only has 160,000 people in it. So when people say, well, why is Indian River County's grade so good? There's a couple of things. Why is a question it's hard to answer in science, but we can speculate that they have a lot fewer people. They have implemented some really interesting algal scrubbing mechanisms in their canals, and they started diverting their canal water west a long time ago. So they have started dealing with their canals and implementing some innovative engineering devices like 30 years ago. So they started a long time ago trying to implement stuff that's coming in through canals. And I think it's partially because they've got the gorgeous Sebastian River and they didn't want it to get impacted by the canals feeding into it, because there certainly are canals going into the Sebastian River. Palm Bay, Turkey Creek, not only does it have bad water quality, but Surfrider has shown us that the bacteria coming down of Turkey Creek tends to be very high at times, goes up and down. That is one of the areas we would like to continue monitoring and get some more volunteers. Turkey Creek, Crane Creek, down here in Sebastian. So if you live on Turkey Creek or Crane Creek, you're interested in getting involved in bacteria testing, talk to me or Cara or somebody, one of the team, before you leave. Central IRL, South Indian River Lagoon. So the South Indian River Lagoon north is pretty much the whole St. Lucie County. And so that's up here. And then the line between north and central is almost right at, what is right there? Ponce? No, I forget. I'm sorry. I don't remember the town that's right there. But the important line is between central and south. And that happens right where the Lake Okeechobee discharge comes in. Right here is between central and south, and the Lake Okeechobee discharge comes in. Thank you. I keep forgetting the Zoom people can't see my cursor. So those of you on the Zoom, the Lake Okeechobee comes in where the F is on the south end of the South Fork of the St. Lucie. That's where we see the Lake Okeechobee discharge come in, and it goes straight up through the St. Lucie estuary and right out into the Atlantic Ocean. The small Loxahatchee, those bees at the bottom, if you go, Loxahatchee River District has their own water management entity. They have their own wastewater treatment plant. They're doing it all right. They are about 64% natural in the watershed. So, you know, the fewer people you have, the more likely you're going to have a bee. And so, so that's where, you know, there's a lot of whys about Loxahatchee, and there's a lot of things we can learn from them. So is the lagoon's health improving? Well, it kind of depends on who you ask, but it's not looking good. From the perspective of water quality and seagrass quality, we're seeing declines in both. The seagrass is declining much, much faster. And what is curious, again, from a scientific perspective, is that historically we've seen an up and down in water quality and seagrass. That kind of, you could see a relationship. There might be a lag between when the water quality drops and the seagrass drops, but there would be kind of a, one would drop, the other would drop, one would go up, the other would go up, until we get to about here, where you see the drop happens in water quality and then seagrass plummets, and then water quality goes up and seagrass doesn't really. And then water quality continues to, you know, kind of go up, and then seagrass starts to come down. And now we know preliminary data shows that seagrass has continued to decline. So these trend lines are kind of the average of it all over time and how it's changed over time. You can see that the water quality trend is not significant statistically. It's a very gradual decline, but really, you know, what we've been seeing for the past 24 years is a lot of up and down, but pretty much not much change over time in water quality. Seagrass is a different story. You know, you can see in that trend line, that orange trend line, that's the seagrass trend line, that the seagrasses are declining precipitously. The green line, the 80 line, is our score. That's our meeting the regulatory targets. And when I was at Brevard County Natural Resources in the mid-aughts, we were celebrating the fact that we had met for the first time targets. And you can see where the water quality had kind of blipped above the green line there in mid-aughts. The seagrasses were coverage was greater than had been since 1942. We were ready to like hold up the mission accomplished sign. And then that's what happens, right? As soon as you start to get confident, then life kind of like slaps you down. 2010, super bloom, 2011, super bloom, 2013, marine mammal mortality event. But, you know, it's job security, right? So you gotta look for the positives. Okay, so in summary, what happens? We got these algal blooms that are being fed by nutrient pollution and pollution that we don't even know about. They kill seagrasses. This is an awesome chart. It came out of St. John's River Water Management District. It shows acreage and it shows coverage. The little tiny line that you can barely see at the bottom, the gray line, that's the actual seagrass coverage. And you can see it's down to like almost 0% at this point. These are hectares and mean transect lengths. So the black line is going to be the transect lengths. The green lines are going to be the aerial extent in probably hectares. And then that tiny little line, it's gray, you can barely see at the very bottom. It's down here. Yeah, that's your coverage. So you can really see. If you just looked at the bars, you would think we weren't doing that badly. But when you look at the coverage, you realize that we're really down to losing well over 90% of our seagrasses in the lagoon. So with that loss in seagrass habitat, you may not even be able to see. There's a glass shrimp in the middle of the seagrass picture in the middle. I mean, they're really hard to see. They're pretty much invisible. But he depends on that for habitat, and he's also food for a whole lot of things. So it's habitat loss. And on top of that, of course, it's the bottom of the food chain. So when you lose the seagrass, you're going to lose the vegetarians. And that's what we're seeing. The manatees are dying of starvation because there are no seagrasses for them to eat. And then with the cold stress, it just exacerbated it. So the manatees are dying, the sea turtles are dying, the green sea turtles that eat seagrass are also going. And then this little guy is another important bait fish. It's a pinfish. They eat seagrass as well. So when these, you know, some of these things, especially the bait fish and the shrimp start to disappear, then you're going to lose your carnivores. So then the predators start to disappear. So what we're seeing, like I said, connections, all these things are connected. This was not a surprise to any of us. We knew that with the seagrasses disappearing, that things were going to start to starve to death. And that's, sadly, what we're looking at. I think, and Pat will talk about this more, that we're going to be better prepared next winter when the cold happens again. Hopefully we'll be better prepared to deal with the manatee mortality at that point. So what can we do? Well, I think we need to question everything we've been doing in the past. I think we need to question our regulatory establishment, the TMDL BMAP process, and that stands for Total Maximum Daily Loads and Basin Management Action Plans. Those are both federal requirements that states had to implement. And in Florida, we only did it after we got sued. But at least we did. We got started. We did it. But we pretty much, started that process begrudgingly, and we only used the existing data that we had to set TMDLs. So we need to revisit that. We need to revisit the whole concept of pollution loading. It's more than stormwater. We need to be considering those groundwater sources in our loading estimates, and we need to look outside the box of what pollutants are going into the lagoon. And I'm talking about the black box of emerging contaminants, which is kind of where I'm going with the next point. We need to consider other water quality parameters. There are things out there that are killing organisms and killing seagrass beyond this simple, indicator scenario of nutrient pollution, blocking light, killing seagrass. That makes sense in a lot of areas in the lagoon, but not all, like Sebastian Inlet. Why are there no seagrasses there? And I understand they're coming back. I heard a rumor that they were coming back, but there's not, at the inlet, there's not that loss of light that we see up here in the north end with the algal blooms, and yet they don't have seagrass. So what's killing the seagrass there? We need to be looking at things, physical parameters, dissolved oxygen, salinity. Salinity is going to change a lot, especially with temperature increases in the future. Bacteria, and that's why we're happy to partner with Surfrider to do bacteria testing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about changing land development techniques. We just can't keep doing things the way we've done in Florida and expect a different result. So what can you do? You can show up, you can support MRC, reduce your nutrient footprint. Everybody keeps talking about carbon footprint, calculating your carbon footprint. Start putting in your head that you also have a nutrient footprint. We all do. We're little nutrient manufacturers. Think about that for a second. So besides that, there are things we do that we could stop doing, like fertilizing our lawns. Like, just try it. Don't fertilize your lawn, see what happens. If you're going to wash the car, that's phosphorus, phosphate pollution. Don't wash it in the driveway, or explain to your neighbor or your family, don't wash the car in the driveway, wash it on the grass. That phosphorus will be part of your fertilizer regime. Yeah, there you go. So instead of fertilizing, just wash your car on the grass, and then you can fertilize your grass while you wash your car and solve two problems with one. Whether it's suburbia or out in agricultural lands, we've got animal waste, animal products to deal with. So picking up after your pet in the suburban realm, disconnecting your lawn from chemicals, any kind of chemicals that you're using outdoors, pressure washing, those kinds of things. Anything that goes down your driveway into the street is going to go right into the storm drain, anything. And volunteering, get involved. So thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to do this bacteria testing. We'd love to have volunteers to help with that. We're going to, and we're continuing to encourage the reestablishment of mechanical weed harvesting instead of aerial spraying of herbicides. In an attempt to reduce state budgets. About 10 years ago, the governor eliminated about 1,100 water management district positions, including the guys that used to run the mechanical machines that removed aquatic weeds from all of our canals, our 47,000 miles of canals that we have. When those people lost their jobs, they started just spraying herbicide everywhere because it was cheaper for them to just spray herbicide than it was to keep some person employed harvesting those weeds. Those that accomplished two things. Well, I guess it helped balance our budget, but when we started killing weeds in place, not only were we contaminating water with herbicide, we were also leaving all of that stuff to fall to the bottom, rot, and release all of those nutrients. So now we've got a new source. Vegetation is one of the only ways you can get nutrients, especially nitrogen, out of solution. But it's key that you get the vegetation out of the water. So once the cattails or the hyacinth or whatever it is taking those nutrients up, taking them up, if you harvest them out of the water, those nutrients are now bound up in the tissues of those plants. So you can use them for fertilizer on your lawn. You could use them for compost. You can do, put them in the landfill or compost them. The landfill is capped with compost, right, before they put the grass on. Lots of things we could do with those weeds besides spray them, watch them die, rot on the bottom, release all that nutrients. Make muck. They're making muck too while they're down there. So mechanical harvesting, we need to get our mechanical harvesting back. That's at the state level. The local level, we need to develop a different way. We can't keep building the way we've been building and expect things to change. So we are advocating for low impact development, green infrastructure, and it's a series of tools and concepts and planning tools that do the simple action of letting rain soak into the ground where it lands. Instead of channeling it off in billions of gushing gallons full of pollution into our estuaries, why don't we encourage it to soak into the ground like it's supposed to? And that's pretty much all it is. But there are ways you can do it naturally. You can use your tree canopy. Trees intercept stormwater. If the water doesn't ever hit the ground, it's not stormwater. It's in the tree, it's being absorbed. Green roofs and walls, elevating structures, just putting houses back on hip walls like they used to be. That allows water to go underneath and percolate back down again. Permeable pavements allow water to go through. And then on this side, rainwater harvesting. There are cisterns where you can set up 800 gallons of rain barrels like we have. Rain gardens, another tool to absorb the water through vegetation. And then there are engineered underground exfiltration systems to accommodate getting more water into the ground. There's all kinds of tools that are available, and we want them to be implemented here. So we're going to bring what we consider to be the leaders in the state and in the country here. And I'm going to get to that slide. I forgot about this one. We have an awesome example of this in Cocoa Beach. And I'm not going to embarrass Joni Regan, who happens to be here in the audience tonight, but this is her creation, her baby, and it is absolutely a joy to go up and experience. It's not only is it beautiful and cool and just a beautiful thing to see, it's also a stormwater management LID project. So we can do them here, we have done them here, and we know how to get them done. So next time you're in Cocoa Beach, get there in time to walk around Minutemen, enjoy looking at this beautiful stormwater feature, and then go into get a cocktail somewhere. But we can do it. We have done it. We need to get that to be our regular way of doing business in the 5-county area. So that's what we're heading for. We're bringing, like I said, the regional experts, the state experts, some national experts down here on October 21st and 22nd. And it's going to be in Rockledge. So I just said, yes, we're going to do it at the Collaborative Center in Rockledge. So it's a beautiful facility. It actually has some LID built into it. So I thought that'd be the perfect place. We can actually tour the facility and you can see what they've done in Rockledge with LID. They've got pervious pavers. They've got some enormous cisterns they're using to irrigate their native vegetation. Nothing is running off of the property. It's fantastic. So they've got a whole bunch of acronyms associated with this toolbox of things you can do. There's low impact development, there's low impact design, there's green infrastructure, there's sustainable urban drainage systems, which is personally my favorite, SUDS. I like SUDS. Doesn't that sound good? Water sensitive urban designs, but they're basically the same suite of tools. And it's all about getting the water back in the ground wherever it lands in whatever way you can get that done. So put this on your calendar, October 21, 22, Rockledge, LID. And right now we're just getting started. So Lagoon Loyal is, there it is, a program being implemented here in Brevard County where you can sign up, you can scan this code that's on the screen right there. And those of you on the Zoom, I think can do it right now, but they're also, I think Nicole is going to also email you the code so you can do it at your convenience. and you'll get points on the Lagoon Loyal Program. The Lagoon Loyal Program, the more points you get, the more free stuff you get. So businesses have signed up to give free massages and dinners and that kind of stuff. So if you go in and put in that you're washing your car on your lawn and not fertilizing and picking up your pet waste, you can get points and then you can go get a massage. So it's like a reward for doing the right thing. So it's a good thing. So this is the right code, but Nicole will also mail it out to everybody so you can get points for attending today. And then you can use those points to hopefully go get a massage or go up to Cocoa Beach and check out the awesome LED project. So thank you all. Thank you for what you're doing. I'm going to turn this over to Pat. I got to recognize all of the people that have supported this effort in the past and continue to. The report card really has been supported by the Gillespie Family Foundation and Darren Gillespie, who from the very beginning bought into this vision and saw the importance of this product, not only for advocacy, but for showing whether it's what we're doing is working or not. And so I think there's no better example of using this product for advocacy than we did this year, partnering with Save the Manatee Club to create, the report card that we sent up to Congress and to our state legislature and asking them, showing them this is what's wrong. The seagrasses are disappearing. We need support for manatees. We need support for the lagoon, and we got it. So this is just, this is a perfect example of why this report card is such an important tool. And it was effective this year in our legislative session. So thank you, Gillespie Family Foundation, for always believing that vision. The Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program funded the science. So they funded that initial methodology of how we figured out how to score things. Northrop Grumman has funded it every year. The Sierra Club is one of our founding partners and funders of it, as well as the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition, the City of Cocoa, and the Venetian ladies of the lagoon who live up there. Were also some just volunteers, people that had a real desire to help the lagoon, loved the report card as a concept, and started fundraising for it and having these fabulous parties, house parties, that we got to go up and have good time and raise money for the report card. So these are a report card. And then the rest of it, really, ever since the very first year, we have had zero government funding for this. We want to keep this as an honest brokerage of what's going on with the lagoon. So we need to keep it as an independent report. We need your donations and your support to make this happen every year. These are the sponsors of this event. The Boaters Exchange, Big Bragger, and Cutwater Spirits were our sponsors today. So thank you to our sponsors. And then we initiated our 100 Friends of the Indian River Lagoon this year. It's a $1,000 commitment to become one of the first 100 Friends of the Indian River Lagoon. And our very first 100 friend is Carroll Distributing Company. And also wanted to say that Surfrider Foundation also joined as one of the 100 Friends of the Indian River Lagoon. So thank you for that. Thank you all for thinking about whether you want to become one of the first 100 Friends of the Indian River Lagoon. And that's all I got. So I'm going to turn it over. So thank you all. We're going to do questions at the end. Thank you. And I'm going to introduce Pat. So are we all good with that? So Pat Rose. Thank you, Pat, for being here virtually. Patrick Rose is Save the Manatee Club's executive director. He's an aquatic biologist and a certified public manager. With over 40 years experience working with manatees, Pat is considered to be one of the world's leading experts on the Florida manatee, so we're very fortunate to have him in our state. From 96 to 2006, Pat was the Save the Manatee Club's director of government relations in Tallahassee, where he advocated on the manatee's behalf before the Florida legislature, governor, and cabinet. And before joining the Save the Manatee Club, he was the first federal manatee recovery activities coordinator and Florida's first manatee and marine mammal coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. He was also the environmental program administrator for the Bureau of Protected Species Management Division of Marine Resources for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Pat has served as a member of every federal manatee recovery team. Presently, he serves on the team's steering committee, and he's a former member of the IUCN World Conservation Union's Sirenia Specialist Group. His many professional awards include the prestigious National Conservation Achievement Award, from the National Wildlife Federation, and the award of recognition presented to him at the first International Manatee and Dugong Research Conference. Pat was nominated for the esteemed Indianapolis Prize, which honors the world's leading animal conservationists. He has a master's degree in aquatic biology from the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and he is an avid boater, pilot, and a certified scuba instructor. And he shared with me a story of getting to fly as a pilot the coast of Florida from 1972 to today. So can you imagine what he's seen change over those years along our coast, what the incredible population growth that we've had and the changes in the estuaries over time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat. If we can give him a round of applause, I'm sure he'll hear it. Thank you, Pat.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I want to maybe just start out by saying that in terms of what you've just asked everyone to look at and do and their responsibilities, all of those things, of course, will help the aquatic ecosystem within the lagoon. But as we'll find out, they should help improve the situation for manatees and those other species that absolutely depend on having healthy seagrass systems. I would just maybe start with what people can do instead of ending with it at this point. I'm pushing really hard, and anybody's ear I can bend, and would love you to encourage you to do it too, is to get with the Biden administration and let them know that there's nothing more basic in terms of infrastructure funding than what we do with our human waste. And a huge part of that is whether it's leaching, failing septic systems, or the need for advanced wastewater treatment or our stormwater treatment. Those are all really basic infrastructure needs. And we've been so deficient in dealing with them that we have so much money that's going to have to go into this. And of course, a lot of people and the efforts, whether it's lobbying our local governments like Brevard County, who has really taken a leadership role and with their local taxes, but they really need more. The other communities, these failing really sewer systems, and we've had leaks even recently in the Indian River Lagoon. Also, there were really large millions and millions of gallons spilled within Brevard County, a number of places on the East Coast. So I would encourage you, the time is still ripe in Congress right now. If you would get to your congressperson and of course our two state senators, and really urge them to join with this effort to include cleanups of our master estuary systems, especially the IRL within that funding mechanism for that. And excuse me, I'm gonna take a drink here. I guess I really enjoyed Lisa's presentation, so I'll be able to sort of focus a bit more specifically on manatees. To begin with, we have been quite frustrated over the last decade, and we've been pushing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really to do more for manatees, and that included our concerns repetitively over the Indian River Lagoon and what was happening in terms of water quality and seagrass loss. With that, I think, as Lisa knows too, I reached out to her before what you'll see, and I'll go through all the manatee mortality we've had starting in December of 2020 and going through this year. But we really had that mortality, that unusual mortality event had not begun yet when I reached out and said, Lisa, I really want to work with you. I want to provide more support for your report card because I'm extremely concerned that we're facing a future catastrophe. And Lisa, of course, was more than happy to begin working together. But I just want to kind of note in the timeline, that was before the mortality really started to go up. But it was not hard to understand that it was foreseeable. And that's part of our frustration, that we had been telling, and other scientists, other biological reviewers had been telling the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they downlisted manatees from endangered to threatened far too early, well before the threats and risks were under control. And in fact, after we saw them increasing and likely to get much worse. So with that, if we can just go ahead and move to the next slide, I'm going to take you through just a super brief, a couple of things. Part of my screen is blanked out and I'm not sure why, but I won't worry about reading it. This photo I just throw into kind of for fun. This is a manatee on a stretcher in the Merritt Island area. it was back in the 70s when the very first techniques were being examined to how can we fit manatees with radio transmitters and be able to follow them. We were even consulting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was consulting with NASA on the project. This was the wrong way to do it. This transmitter and the antenna was actually sutured to the top of the manatee, something that really gives me, I cringe when I think about it, but it wasn't long before we moved on to better processes. And I'll just say here, that was the beginnings of the designs for the space shuttle, and they developed a solid fuel booster recovery vessel that was going to just cut up one manatee after another. And so we worked with them to redesign it and add bow thrusters to the front of the vessel. And then they agreed to operate only on those bow thrusters and not use the large, powerful propellers while they were in the inland waterways until they got out. As it turned out, it helped them be much more efficient at recovering the boosters and preventing catching the divers in the propellers, as well as the lines from the parachutes. Next slide, please. So again, since I turned 70 this January, and for a while I was thinking about retiring, I thought I'd throw in a 1980s photo of me second from the right while we were using the capture techniques at the power plants in order to capture manatees, fit them with radio transmitters. But if you see in the right hand of the person in the forefront on the left, they're holding a smaller VHF transmitter with a tether that goes, and we can go to the next slide, it's prettier, and I can talk just a little bit more. So this is a technique used today. There's a soft rubber coated belt of webbing that goes around the peduncle of the manatee. That's the narrow point just before the wide tail, and with a breakaway release and also then the floating transmitter. Salt water will attenuate any signals from the transmitter, so they really have to get that antenna out. And I'll also just mention back for history, the photo, the other reason I put that photo in with me and back in the 1980s, that day was the day we were capturing manatees at the power plant in Fort Myers. And it was a day the space shuttle blew up. And we could tell even from there, it was a clear day, extremely cold day. We knew something had gone wrong. But the reason I talk about it now is because when we got there, the power plant was not operating, and there was no warm water, and we were some of the coldest days in January, and manatees were going to face very shortly, if that power plant didn't get put back on, we were going to be facing mortality from cold stress. And so I had the opportunity to call my executive director at the Department of Natural Resources at the time, and I literally just said, please, you've got to call the governor, and asked the governor to call the president of Florida Power and Light and have them turn on the power plant, because we're going to be facing some really serious problems with manatees. And I say that to tell you that was the genesis of how we then went forward and developed manatee protection plans for all power plants. And so we had very comprehensive protocol and so forth that needed to be undertaken to assure we didn't have failures that would literally leave manatees out in the cold. Next slide, please. As things advanced along the research process, there was more and more of a need to be able to rescue manatees out in the open water and so forth. So capture boats were developed, and they were actually modified in many cases off the old mullet boats, which gave an opportunity to be able to do this more safely and working with nets in order to capture manatees, as opposed to have the chance of entangling. Next slide, please. So I put this slide in basically just because I like it. It's an example of something healthy going on with manatees. We've got a mating herd here, and just to express that there were thousands of hours of aerial surveys, radio telemetry, and photo identification, together with more necropsies than we preferred, and had a pretty good opportunity of what needed to be done with manatees as we really dug in and worked on the recovery efforts. We had a fantastic recovery teams. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was taking the responsibility very seriously. The state partners, even the Marine Industries Association, was working together. Next slide, please. And so if you see, I don't know if you can tell, there's one manatee that's the darker one, kind of facing one direction. All the others are kind of hugging on and so forth. That's the female. and the rest of them are all males. Yes, that's the female there. This was actually taken in the waters in the Vero Beach area. So manatees, there was even an argument back in those days, this was probably 1978 or something in that time frame, about why were manatees, depleted and there were such low numbers. Some people felt we needed to capture them and raise them in captivity. We felt very strongly with the science that existed that the problem was not manatees reproducing, but rather they being killed early, and then issues relevant to their protection at their warm water habitat sites and the springs and so forth in terms of disruptions to them. So I'll get into really quickly just some background on manatee biology, but a female manatee, and you can go to the next slide, will come into estrus on her own cycle, much like people do. There's not really a mating season as such for manatees. She will, and they'll have a calf about once every 3 to 5 years. They'll carry that calf for about 12 months, and they'll give birth normally to one, but sometimes twin. Next slide, please. And they'll nurse and help care for that manatee, teach it where its feeding areas are, where the warm water sites, where to return to in the winter and so forth, for at least a year and sometimes up to 2 years. Next slide, please. So despite the laws that were on the books for centuries, manatees were originally hunted to near extinction for their meat and hide. So that's why they were originally had got in trouble, and they were even extirpated in many of the island areas within their habitat. And with the Great Depression and even World War II, there's sort of resurgence of illegal hunting of manatees, but ultimately the laws really better into effect, and we started seeing the opportunity for other new laws to be created that could help recover the population. Next slide. I'm going to short circuit a little bit, but the three most important really protections for manatees, the first of those is the 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act, and it comes into play both directly in terms of protecting manatees as an official marine mammal, but it also has coordinating elements with other federal laws, including the issues with the EPA even and other federal actions, which I'll talk about a little bit in the future. The Endangered Species Act, of course, from 1973. Manatees are currently listed as a threatened species. They really should never have been downlisted in 2017 from endangered, because those risks and threats, even though it had many years of recovery, and this is maybe a good time, I didn't put the slide in, and I think in retrospect I should have, but if you go back to the 1960s and 70s, the population reached its low about that point in time, and we had approximately 800 to 1,000 manatees then. With all of the effort that went in, the protections of these laws, including the Manatee Sanctuary Act in 1978, manatee protection plans that were developed, we saw steady increases in the population as more manatees were literally protected directly, but indirectly helping to protect their habitat. And comprehensive manatee protection plans were developed for 13 key counties starting in 1989. Next slide, please. And so, but does that obviously give perfect protection? No. And I like to use this slide here, shows you how we keep track of individual manatees with their scars from being hit by boat propellers and different parts of the watercraft, but also to talk to the resilience of manatees. Despite these really disfiguring injuries and so forth, they are able to carry on quite often. Of course, a large number do die. We had record watercraft mortality in 2016, 2017 broke again, 2018 broke another record, in 2019 we also broke a record. In 2020 we won't know because of COVID. Far fewer manatees were necropsied during that time, so we really don't know whether we broke a record or not. And of course in 2021 that won't be possible, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Next slide, please. But I like to emphasize that nearly every manatee alive today has already been within an inch of losing its life to watercraft. We're going to talk more about, of course, getting back to the Indian River Lagoon, the loss of seagrasses. So these are compounding problems, and I'll talk about some of the other challenges. But in terms of the boaters, we know they're not trying to do this on purpose. I'm a lifelong boater. Some of the boaters have been the best. They've helped save many, many manatees because they'll report those injured manatees, in some cases even staying with them and helping to make sure that they don't expire in the process. But we do need to share that waterway in a selfless way. Next slide, please. And I just throw in some for Save the Manatee Club. I didn't say this in the beginning, but Save the Manatee Club was actually formed 40 years ago. And this study in Blue Spring State Park has actually been going on for about that same length of time. A ranger with the state parks actually began it, Wayne Hartley. He's now working for Save the Manatee Club, and we continue. So they've kept track of really each individual manatee was there, which females gave birth, and then subsequent lineages and so forth. It's just, again, but it's really tied into the scars that the animals receive from watercraft. Next slide, please. And so, can we do the next slide? Hopefully it's going to work. There we go. So I'll spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about the different threats and risks to manatees. I'll mention red tide again. We've had years like in 2018 recently where more than 300 manatees just died alone from the red tide toxin exposure. And most of that generally happens in Southwest Florida as the center of that, from really Collier through Lee and upwards to all the way to Hillsborough and Tampa Bay. Habitat loss, well, we'll go back to that. We're experiencing that in just drastic concentrations. There's a huge threat to the risk of losing our natural springs. Those are going to be the future of the manatees population as we look at losing actually in the long term with global climate change and sea level rise. We're going to be really not having these artificial warm water sources going forward as we look down the road. And that's going to put a tremendous strain on the manatees having to reconfigure where they depend in terms of the winter habitat. And of course, those food resources, anything that either affects the freshwater vegetation, we'll lump in seagrasses and then the freshwater species like Valsinaria, SSAV. We have degraded water quality, of course, again, same topic that Leesa went through and what we're experiencing in this unusual mortality event. I mentioned the threat which is coming, and that's going to be the elimination ultimately of probably the majority of those artificial warm sources. But I would point out that 60% of manatees alive today depend on those artificial sources in the wintertime. And it's going to be a very heavy undertaking, and to be able to make that transition to safely provide manatees other alternative habitat, and so that they're not literally left out in the cold. And that's something I'm also pushing in terms of the Biden administration on, is that we believe that that issue going forward is also something that should be supported with infrastructure funding so that we can do that properly and not leave manatees out in the cold as we transition away from those power plants to other sources and reliance on natural springs and other passive warm water areas. Unusual mortality events, that's what we're in the middle of right now. I'll leave that one and come back to it in the next slides. And then there are many other issues related to the water control structures. Leesa talked about all the canals. Many of these systems and the way that Florida has been replumbed, they can literally crush and kill and drown manatees. They prevent them from getting to habitat that's very helpful. I'll point out another large effort we're involved with right now, and that's the restoration of the Ocklawaha River. There was the failed Cross Florida Barge Canal. That's a remnant. The dam that backs up the Ocklawaha River is still there, but it's failing. It's going to really could be catastrophic to the area. That system needs to be restored. And if it is, then manatees would actually have free access to Silver Spring, and that would accommodate hundreds and hundreds of manatees during the wintertime. Next slide, please. This is when, and I don't have many of these, but I tried to also pick some of the less gruesome ones. I used this one. This is at Manatee Cove area where the Fish and Wildlife Commission and those staff members are so selfless in all that they went through, with more than 300 manatees dying just in 2021 alone, another 40 in December of 2020. This has been a really difficult situation, but they've really gone the extra mile over and over to get the best scientific information that they can get from those carcasses. A number of manatees that had fully necropsies went down to about 1 in 4 because of the logistics and COVID. Remember, this was all during the times when they really had to do those safeguards. So I can't say enough about the dedication and commitment of the Fish and Wildlife Commission personnel. You may hear me time to time, you may have already heard me complaining about the Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal government, not recognizing the serious threat. But they, I think, now have realized what they missed, and they're going to be rallying hard to catch up with what they shouldn't have let get behind. Next slide, please. So this is where we'll talk a little bit. I didn't update the total number, but we're over 760 manatees that have died in 2021 alone. This particular graph, you'll see the circle at 749. That was about, I think, about 2 weeks ago when this information, but it's still relevant to talk about it. So if you look on the right-hand side, the totals, 2021 is on the top at 749. Last year, our total for the entire year, or excuse me, total to date was 288 with 253 in 2019. I'll let you read them. In 2018, as I mentioned, the reason that number is as high as it is because we were having a terrible red tide mortality year, but even that's less than half of where we are now, even with that really, really bad red tide events going on that year. And our 5-year average, which is somewhat influenced by that 2018 figure, because that year ended up being about the worst year for manatees within 3 of there's ever been. And so we are going to far exceed any record we've ever had before in terms of mortality, and likely easily exceed over 1,000 manatees lost this year. And I can talk a little bit more about that. Maybe this is a good time to say there are about somewhere between 7,000 and probably 8,500 manatees. Nobody knows for sure exactly how many there are, but I know that those risks and threats to the manatee population are increasing, and they're increasing dramatically. And not only is the Indian River Lagoon suffering, but we have hints from the work that's being done in Biscayne Bay, Charlotte Harbor, Sarasota Bay, and even now Tampa Bay, which went through its own major failure back in the 50s and 60s. They learned, they implemented really strong recovery measures for treating wastewater and so forth. And that system in Tampa Bay had lost between 85 and 90% of its seagrasses, but the majority of those were restored. But we're now starting to see that maybe that's starting to slip backwards. We don't want to see that happen. And the lessons we hope are being learned in the IRL are going to be able to apply these other areas and bay systems before they get anything close to what's happening here. Next slide, please. I won't go through every one of these, but this was sort of a timeline. If you look back 12 December 21, that's when the first target was triggered, where it said, look, using the standards for unusual mortality events, there were more than 7 carcasses in a 72-hour period. So that happened in 12 December. Moving forward, by Christmas time, that we're seeing many more manatees that were being affected by abnormal behavior, buoyancy problems, and so forth. So it's getting more serious. Early January, it exceeded the threshold for that. Again, by early January, excuse me, didn't do that very well. So by mid-January, there are field reports of manatees generally thinner this winter, starting to get a lot more concern. And as it moves forward, I'll just save some time here and we can have lots of time for discussion and questions. But by 22 March, the UME was officially declared. That's where also you can have a hand in this. There's really not very much money that was available to fund these UMEs, even though there's technically a fund in the federal government and in Congress to do that. That fund was at a very low threshold. And right now, the budgets are being considered. And we again urge you to contact your representatives and urge them to go ahead and support not only this UME funding, but also the Prescott grant money, because that's also another fund that can be used under the Marine Mammal Protection Act to fund for these unusual mortality events and other issues. Next slide, please. Again, just to sort of help graphically understand the time frames, the diagram on the left shows those manatees that were found dead and where they were found dead from 1 December to 21 March. And then on the right, the blue circles are where rescues were occurring. You can see it was not at that point in time, not just the IRL area. We were having some significant rescues necessary, as well as mortality all the way to the southeast part of Florida as well. Next slide. And this again shows a progression from how many were found dead in December and where, then January, February, you can see that's at the height of it. By March, it was starting to lessen somewhat, but still quite serious. And to this point in time, there are a few animals still being recovered, but the majority of the manatees have moved out of the region and are moving up north as far as South Georgia into the St. Johns River, all the way down through the rest of the intercoastal on the East Coast, and some will move into the Keys. The Brevard County area, Merritt Island, Banana River, Indian River Lagoon, Mosquito Lagoon is sort of the central hub for the whole East Coast. You have manatees coming in and out of the region throughout the year. It peaks in the wintertime with what had been historically been as high as about 2,000 manatees. That, of course, is being dramatically impacted by these mortality events. We wouldn't expect that there would be that high a number coming into next winter. We're going to have to ensure that manatees are, well, let's go next slide and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll cover this just in case I missed an important point here, but Brevard County is a hot spot within about half of the mortalities, more than 300 carcasses since December 1st. In fact, when this was put together, there's been significantly more than that. And I'll point out that on the East Coast alone, there's been more than 600 manatees that have, out of that 760 that were just on the East Coast alone overall. Let's see if there's anything here that really couldn't already have done. So as manatees disperse, similar malnutrition state is now an issue in the Northeast. So, and I'll give an example of why that's the case. So as the manatees left this area for lack of forage, they went through months of malnutrition, and they had lost so much, both the fat and muscle and so forth, so they can't recover quickly. And so that's something that takes actually months for, even with good forage, for them to be able to restore it. And that's why next slide, please. That's why the rescues are so important for manatees, and why this was too different or from just a cold weather event is when you have cold stress and cold related mortality, it's generally going to affect those smaller manatees, the calves, adolescent manatees. In this case, it was affecting adults, and some of them had lost up to 40% being underweight. And that's being that also about 40% of the carcasses were adults. That's highly unusual. So we really never have had historically for manatees a starvation event like this. So this is very different than what you would experience in a cold stress situation alone. The middle photo is sort of showing their folds and so forth. Normally you'd have a nice round, robust manatee. In this case, they'd lost so much weight, you can see that those folds are going there. This was a manatee that was rescued and brought into one of the manatee rescue and rehabilitation partners. I might mention those now, it's probably a good time. That's coordinated by the federal government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then the Fish and Wildlife Commission, our state wildlife resources. They really manage the rescues and do the bulk of that work with the different partners. And then they're taken to facilities like SeaWorld or Miami Aquarium or Zoo Tampa or Jacksonville Zoo. And then also there are partners like the Homosassa Wildlife State Park, as well as out-of-state facilities that will help take care of manatees. And then there's also one of the rescue partners is the Clearwater Marine Aquarium, and they also perform the responsibilities of radio tagging and monitoring manatees upon their release. I think we can go to the next slide. We've talked about all the loss in the seagrasses. I'm going to that's just a photo to look at it. And I think I remarked earlier today in the talk, it looks more like a desert, barren desert than it does look where we had historical, really healthy seagrass meadows. Next slide, please. And again, these are just examples on the left, 2013, showing really nice, lush, really seagrass meadows, and then on the right, bare sand. Clearly, we've lost more than 90% of the biomass. And I'll talk a little bit more how those are rated by the St. John's Water Management District. They do a very good job of the monitoring and reporting, but if you don't see the relationship of where there is some seagrass and then percent cover, it's just really important to understand you have to lay the two kind of one over the other. Next slide, please. And you probably don't need to see more, but here they are again, the progression between 2013 to 2016, 2017, 2020. And I'll make a little dig on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here. We were telling them, we were repeatedly talking about how concerned we were, and they shouldn't be downlisting manatees. We were having major problems with the IRL and other places in terms of what was happening in terms of the risk and threats to manatees. And even though there had historically, if you go back to say 2010, 29, certainly, there was so much coverage with 70,000 acres of seagrass. This should never have been a problem, but obviously this is a tragic situation now. Next slide, please. Kind of just, again, more examples. Lisa's already covered this well, so let's go to the next slide. I will point out that the graph on the left, that's not seagrass. Well, it's representative of kind of where the seagrasses are, but it's really where were the manatees feeding. And these are that highlights. So the red is short towards that's a higher concentration. And then as you move up to the orange and the yellow and the light green, that means they were used a little less, and the white essentially is that they're really not there. So that's showing you that in effect, that relationship between where the manatees wanted to be and spend their time really was in association to where the seagrass areas were as well. Next slide. And of course, the slide on the right showing that they're gone. This is, again, a slide that it was in one of Lisa's, but I just want to talk about it briefly. If you move all the way to the right, you're looking at what's already beginning and the reporting of the initial data from 2021, and you see it's continuing to decline. So if you look at that, the cover, but then look at the bottom, there's a light gray. That's the one, if you track that, that's the percent cover. Look at it's going down to virtually gone. And that's why this is so serious. And so we'll have better information coming. We hope there's some recovery over the summer when seagrasses tend to grow more and so forth. But I just don't have any real confidence that we're going to see. I hope we have as much as we can get. But even if we have perfect progress in it, it's still going to be so far below what is going to be necessary going forward. Next slide, please. This is where I really want to, I had already talked about the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership and some of those members, but this, I would encourage anyone who sees something unusual about a manatee, if it's breathing rapidly, if it is listing to one side, or it's beached, of course, they need to call the Fish and Wildlife Commission at the 888-404-FWCC, or of course 3922. Also, I'll do my pitch. I don't like to ask for money and things like that, but I will ask for money for the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership. If you would want to contribute to that, those are tax deductibles. You could go to manateerescue.org. That's manateerescue.org. And there have been more than 90 manatees already rescued this year. There's going to be probably, I'm going to guess 50 or more rescued at least. And then we may be facing the need coming into next winter to rescue hundreds of manatees and take care of them to prevent massive losses like we suffered this last winter. And that's going to require, next slide, please. I can talk about some of the, so this is an example of really how bad some of these manatees were before they expired. This is a female manatee that was rescued. It turned out that she was a known manatee because her name, Desi, she was actually rescued in 2010 as a subadult in the Satellite Beach area, suffering from cold stress, but then went on to, regain all of her strength and actually have calves, and was ultimately rescued more recently with a calf. Sadly, I just learned this week that she had to be euthanized. She just was not able, even with the best care from SeaWorld, that she was not able to be saved, and was really suffering. And sadly, there were, as we know, there have been 300 or so that were facing a similar type circumstance. Next slide, please. But again, we've rescued, the rescue partnership has really been there and rescued almost 100 manatees already this year. This is the good news. I want to try to include some of that in the talk, of course. If you didn't know, there was a manatee named Chessie, got his name from being rescued in 1994 in Chesapeake Bay. And he was still kind of a young manatee, and he didn't really figure out he needed to get back to the warm waters of Florida. And at the time, since Save the Manatee was formed in 1981, we were already 13 years old as an organization, and we went ahead and wanted to help get Chessie back to Florida. And we felt that it was worth doing that, and put up the funding for a large partnership of other partners to do that rescue and bring Chessie back. And that was in 1994. So it actually worked. And so more recently, this May 11th, Chessie was rescued in the Palm Beach County area, suffering from pneumonia. Also, he was somewhat emaciated, not terribly so, but had other complications. SeaWorld actually did a fantastic job in working. They weren't sure that he was going to be able to be saved, but he was released. Actually, he was released on May 11th. I got that backwards, in Palm Beach County. And he now, actually, the most recent sighting of this week was in Amelia Island. And so he did kind of what we thought he would do. He was fitted with a satellite transmitter. He's being followed by Clearwater Marine Aquarium, and has made it all the way up to the Amelia Island area. We didn't expect him to stay around in the Brevard County, Volusia County area, because there's next to no food for them. So it was actually kind of a good thing. Today, there were 3 other manatees released in the Sebastian area, and they were all fitted with radio transmitters, satellite transmitters, and they'll be followed, one of them by Clearwater Marine and 2 of the others by the U.S. Geological Survey, as more and more manatees need to be tagged and followed in the Indian River Lagoon, so we can see where they go, what food they're finding, what other manatees they're being associated with. And that needs to carry on all through the summer, so that we're ending into the fall and winter, we can be prepared with contingency plans to do mass rescues if need be, and take care of manatees and not see hundreds more die from these circumstances. But that all has to yet be worked out, and we hope less would be necessary, but we need to be ready. Next slide, please. So some more good news. I want to try to focus on what's being done to make things better. I put this photo in to show a positive situation. In Kings Bay, Crystal River, they had gone through years and years and years of treatments from aquatic plant control, especially with the use of herbicides and so forth to knock down the vegetation. A lot of muck had developed on the bottom, and the other species of algae began to grow there. It was right on the cusp of flashing over to phytoplankton blooms, and in some parts of the bay that was happening. After some kind of failed efforts and improper methods, and say the Manatee Club actually had to get involved with an organization that was working there. Their intent was to clean up the bay and to do good work, but their methodology was such that they were going to cause the bay to really fall into a collapse in terms of algal blooms and things that we've seen in the Indian River Lagoon. It was inevitable. They were literally taking aquatic plant harvesters and digging those into the bottom with an open conveyor belt and trying to dredge the muck with this open system. And we literally had to file an administrative challenge and ultimately got the Corps of Engineers to issue a cease and desist order. But I want to go on and say that same group, they changed their tactics. They did their homework. They followed up on the suggestions that we were making. We tried to help them in every way they could. And it's turned out, as in joint working with the Water Management District there, this organization then undertook the task of cleaning up the canals and replanting the Valleson area. And it's actually been a very good success. So that's where sometimes it gets a little tough when just wanting to do the right thing is not enough. You've got to do it the right way. And I've had discussions with Leesa, and I know Brevard County is really working really hard at removing muck and working with the cities to do it the right way. But we've got to have that monitoring. We've got to have, not just assume something's going to be done the way it needs to be done. There needs to be that sort of checkup on it. And as the best practices are used, they can have these dramatic positive results. Next slide, please. So some more good news for this region. This is a list of areas where there are planned eelgrass restoration projects. So the eelgrass is a freshwater species, but very important to manatees and other fisheries. So Crane Creek, Turkey Creek, Goat Creek, Sebastian River, Taylor Creek, North Fork of the St. Lucie, and Loxahatchee are all scheduled for restoration projects. And in doing that, they'll also need to have a part of that will need to have excluders in order to protect the new plants from being eaten by whether there be manatees or other fishes and so forth, so that they can get a good hold. They won't be covering all of them, but a certain percentage will be. And that's a process that was also used in Kings Bay, and it's been done with good success. But again, that's still going to be dependent on the water quality within each of those systems. So it's important to do all those things that Leesa was talking about as we move forward to try to improve the water quality within those other tributaries and so forth as well. This is probably a good time to say there will be a number of other projects likely funded with the $8 million that was appropriated. We lobbied hard along with others for the legislature did appropriate about $8 million in order to increase the access for manatees to the natural springs and also for replanting and for improvements to manatee forage habitat. $8 million is not enough in the big picture of things, but it's a great start to that. And we thank Governor DeSantis for supporting that. He has a penchant for vetoing projects that are not worthy ones. We know he felt this was worthy, and we thank him for for making sure that was retained in the budget after the legislature made that appropriation. Next slide, please. Well, I think we're getting to the end of the presentation, and I just want to leave you with the thought, we sure don't want the next winter to be worse, but even if this sort of perfect progress has been made from this point to this coming winter, we could see a worse situation if we were facing a really severe winter, because that's going to complicate things. And while some manatees will probably find other places to go, most of them won't. Most of them will be right back to the power plant there in Titusville, and it's going to be a touch and go situation. So within the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership that's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Fish and Wildlife Commission as primary partners, together with the other partners I mentioned, we're also working on contingency plans, and so that we can, if necessary, be able to rescue large numbers of manatees and take care of them. But again, I hope that's not going to be necessary, but it's a long process to recover from the catastrophe we found ourselves in. And with that, it's probably where I'll end my talk, but I will remain available for any questions and follow-ups.
You might not be able to hear them, Pat, but they were clapping for your absolutely fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, give us 1 second, Pat. I'm going to get you spotlighted.
Okay. Am I on?
Okay, great. And then for those of you that are at home, I'm going to add a spotlight for Leesa so that we have these
Great.
two as our main people. That should be all right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Pat and Leesa. Those were really a ton of information. I know that we have a lot of questions, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. Sorry about that. A little update on our thing. Ooh.
I'll just say manateerescue.org while we're waiting. So, but
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you, Pat, for that. And I'm going to see Congressman Posey tomorrow at 11:30. So I need to get you on the phone so I can have my list of things to ask
Okay.
him. He couldn't write fast enough.
absolutely.
All right. So, Leesa, we're going to start you off with one our first question.
Okay.
And the first one is, should we just cut an inlet to deal with the water quality issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're still investigating that question. The Florida Institute of Technology got some funding from the state legislature that they have been using for the past couple of years to model that concept. And they're doing a pilot project as we speak. There's a couple of things they've already figured out. One is that a two-way flow may not be beneficial for our beaches. If we start opening inlets that are allowing the muck and the polluted water to go out to the Atlantic, it could damage nearshore reefs. It could accumulate on our beaches, and we can destroy our tourism economy on the beach side as well, which we certainly don't want to do. And then the other thoughts are, politically, we're really probably not going to get much support for another inlet. We've had leaders at the state level in the past determine that there would never be a new inlet in the state of Florida because of their costs. They cost a fortune to manage, and they also lead to additional beach nourishment projects, which cost a fortune because wherever you cut an inlet, everything down shore of that is going to have depleted sand. What FIT has discovered already is a one-way flow, and that's what they're investigating, whether they could do a pilot project up near the Port Canaveral here in Brevard County, and pump water one way from the port into the lagoon up there. How is that going to affect water quality, or is it going to even have adequate energy to make any difference whatsoever? So I think the question is really, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is there even a political will to do something like that? And what is it going to do in the long run to our beaches and the nearshore reefs quality as well, which we would certainly never want to jeopardize. But we do know from the work of Gary Azzarillo that the Sebastian Inlet only affects about 5 acres. 5 acres. So that, I mean, it's not cut for the environmental quality, it's cut for navigational purposes. But that's a pretty huge inlet with a lot of energy, and we're still only, it's only affecting about 5 acres.
Excellent. Thank you, Leesa. Pat, are there plans to wean manatees off the artificial warm water sources here in Brevard? Do we want them to migrate? ?
So in the long-term picture, yeah. But in terms of having a solution that's available to us today, we're not there yet. And so it is part of the long-term strategy, as with even additional power plants. But it's going to take a lot more study. We had actually years of work working towards that. That was one of the task force that had been undertaken under really under when manatees were listed as an endangered species. There was a warm water working group. That really, it's one of those things, I know I'm going to broaden it a little bit, one of those things that the attention didn't keep being given that it deserved. And so this is going to take a lot of money and time, effort, and study, but in the long term, yes, short term, no. That won't be part of a short term process out of the dilemma we're in today.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat. Leesa, what is the county doing to prevent the accidental leaks on behalf of outdated and inadequate wastewater treatment facilities? And why put people on sewer if the system is already so overtaxed as opposed to septic?
Yeah. Which county? No, let's say Brevard. So Brevard County has the Save our Indian River Lagoon tax that we all voted for. Thank you, yay! And they are using it to hook people up from septic to sewer, and they're also using it to try to retrofit and improve the wastewater treatment efficiency of key wastewater treatment plants. The ones that are polluting the most are the ones the county is focusing the soil money on to try to upgrade them so that they're more efficient and the waste discharge stream that's coming out of them has less pollution in it. So what is typically coming out of those wastewater treatment plants is nitrogen and phosphorus. And some of the permits in this county are allowing 28 parts per million of nitrogen to be released through irrigation lines, through reclaimed water, and so on. That's a lot of nitrogen. That's a lot. We have the potential to get it down to 3. We have the potential to get it down to 0. We have the potential to get it, to be drinking water. So we have the technology to make our wastewater treatment plants function better. I mean, there are places where we are drinking wastewater. Not we aren't, but California people are. We can make our wastewater as clean as possible, and yet we just don't have the money or the political will to get it done here. So hopefully we are going to start moving in that direction. Wastewater treatment needs to be upgraded. We're dealing with the sins of the past, right? We're dealing with really, in all fairness, an incredible population boom. Our state has experienced tremendous growth of population for decades. For as long as I can remember, I've been saying that $1,000 people a day. And I know it's ranged from like 680 to 1,300 over my career, but it's still, a lot of people every day. Every 3 years, it's another 1 million people coming into our state. Our cities and counties that are really undertaxing are just building new wastewater facilities, putting in plants, getting septic tanks in the ground, creating roads, trying to accommodate 1,000 people a day, forgetting that they also have a maintenance issue, or they don't have the resources to deal with out of sight, out of mind. It's all new. We just new lines, new this. We need to deal with our sins of the past, our failing infrastructure, out of sight, out of mind. It's out there, and there's a lot of it. So the county is using soil. The county does have a plan where wastewater and the natural resources folks are working cooperatively to identify the projects that need to be prioritized, and they're moving forward with those. I know there are an awful lot of septic to sewer conversion projects in the works, not only here in Brevard, but in other counties. I just read about one down in Indian River County. I just read about one up in Oak Hill, Volusia County. And they're helpful. And again, prioritizing where those projects happen, and the good point being made there of where is that wastewater going now? Is it going into a plant that's going to then turn around and spray it all over the neighborhood as reclaimed irrigation water? What is the efficiency of the plant that it's going to? So fortunately, the person was very insightful with that question. Those things are being considered as priority projects in Brevard County. Where is the waste going? I think the ultimate frustration for me, though, in terms of Brevard County and the soil, is that we're using our tax money and we're taking people off of septic, but we're still allowing new septic tanks to be installed. So we could spend millions of dollars taking out 140 septic tanks that we all celebrate, and then they permit 500 more. So we can't stop the growth. We can't stop the influx of people. So what are we going to do with that? Are we going to say there's a moratorium on septic tanks and we're going to hold the line? Are we going to start to, don't even get me started on what happened in session this year with property rights. But, are we going to really start to be powerful in drawing the line on development and where we put development and how we put development? But human waste and dealing with human waste is a huge part of that. That's what I meant earlier when I said we're little nutrient manufacturers.
Right. If I might just add, that's why I'm talking. This is such a unique time from a potential fiscal standpoint, because what is more basic than what we do with our human waste? I mean, a bridge is infrastructure, but treating our human waste should be the first line of infrastructure. And we are so far behind. To your point, Leesa, we've grown so far in Florida, being unsustainable in our processes. And when we are unsustainable and aren't looking at dealing with the growth and development outcomes, there's only one way it can go. We're going to have systems reach a tipping points, and they're going to begin to collapse. And it's not going to stop with the sentinel manatees in this case. It's going to go on until our own human health is going to suffer. But what's different this year? What's different is that
Congress is looking at a major infrastructure funding. There's more money potentially available right now than there will be probably in the next decade. And so anyone who can, whether your member is a Democrat or a Republican, let them know that human waste doesn't respect a party. They need to all get behind making up for the losses that we haven't done sustainably. And we must have new advanced wastewater treatment for all of those septic drain fields that are going to be taken offline. So there's capacity for them. The only way that's going to happen in a time frame that's reasonable is if we have enough funding and, of course, commitment to do it. I know everybody understands that, but I think if we don't ask, we don't get.
Awesome. Thank you
Good.
very much, Lisa and Pat. Pat, question for you. What is your opinion on feeding the manatees?
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit. I was definitely not in favor of feeding manatees last spring and really the late part of the winter to spring, because I didn't feel it would do more good than harm. And we would have had the potential to hold manatees there when they needed to leave the area and find forage at other places where it was naturally available to them. But I do believe, and I'm pressing right now to all of the agencies and groups that are involved with understanding where we're going to be going into next winter, I'm saying we have to have a plan to be able to rescue large numbers of manatees, and therefore we're going to have to be able to sustain them in that process somehow. I hope that doesn't happen, but I do believe it would have been a mistake to feed them last season, but I think we have to have everything on the table as a potential to avoid hundreds of more manatees starving to death. And we have to know what's happening with those individual manatees' health going into that, so we have that plan, and it's being worked on. So it is something that we've got people's attention on, and we're going to work on it, but I want to see it avoided at all costs if we can.
Great, thank you very much. And kind of going off of the manatee's diet, can't we replant seagrass? How long would it be for the seagrasses to recover through restoration?
Do you mind if I take that, Lisa? Or was that okay? So as we talked about already, let me shift this to SAV first. So in some of these freshwater systems, that's already happening in terms of eelgrass and so forth. That's not your technical seagrasses, and we'll get back to that. But planting seagrasses in areas that the water quality is not going to be sufficient to be maintained, grow, and flourish is kind of going to be a waste. So you're going to have to really have a good handle on what the water quality is. And in addition to the water quality, you've got to think about those other things, whether it's wave action and wind action that's going to potentially disrupt that. You've got to know what subsoils are there and how well they're going to be rooted. It may be some time yet before much of the lagoon could even be available for replanting, but as soon as it is, it should be one of the considerations that's undertaken. And also, not only improving water quality, but the wave issues and the substrates and so forth are factors involved in other species, like Lisa mentioned earlier. Someone was confusing chlorpa with seagrasses and washing up on the shore. Well, chlorpa can be an early colonizer. It can actually stabilize some of the subsurface soils and so forth in a way that makes it easier for seagrasses to naturally reoccur in those areas through vegetative propagation or seeds and so forth, depending on what species you have. And it might even be necessary to actually look at recruiting a seeding from an intermediary species that normally wouldn't be one that would be sustained in the system. But there are some species of seagrass that can be actually planted by seed, and that can sort of be the first seagrasses in, and then the next ones that would be a more permanent species, and that diversity could go forward. So
excellent. So definitely not a simple process.
no, and a lot of effort needs to be given, there are going to be places that will be early candidates, and those should be encouraged. In fact, we're supporting some of those right now as Save the Manatee Club, but I don't want to see a massive amount of effort into replanting if it doesn't really have a good chance of being successful, and we haven't fixed what's broken first.
Exactly. Lisa, Do you know if there are plans to address the spraying of mosquitoes with insecticides? Brand,
No,
no.
I don't know. I doubt it. It'd be nice to get the fireflies back though.
And
There are, I will say, there are those that believe that that's a part of what's going on and what's wrong. I don't have enough in my own personal knowledge to understand whether that's the case or not, but I don't think any stone should be left unturned. We should be looking hard at each and everything. Leesa was mentioning too, there are some of these things that don't make sense just purely on water quality in terms of nutrients as well as clarity and so forth. If there's some other thing, again, the example that was talked about at the noon one, where the bald eagles were dying, and it turned out after months of research, it was a combination of a chemical process together with the algae, forms of algae, and so it could be some of these other things. So we should be looking, but we don't want to jump to conclusions either. And I'm going on a little far. There was legislation proposed this session to look at sort of seagrass banking and things like that. We have to be really careful about how we approach those. I don't want to see something supported and getting rid of seagrasses somewhere else because you're going to plant them somewhere in exchange for that. That can be dangerous. So I just kind of throw that out there as you hear new things brought up. If there's a way to really make sure that seagrass planting takes place, but it's not at the expense of elimination of seagrass somewhere else. Okay, let's talk about that. But I don't think we should be trading it.
excellent. Thank you very much. A question for you both. Where can we direct high school students to take action?
Right here.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. And we also welcome that to come to SaveTheManatee.org. We've got a lot of background information. We can use interns as well. We have a action alert network, and we engage the many different levels of government. And so we would certainly invite them too. But absolutely, that's why I reached out to Leesa early on in this, because of the great work that the MRC has been doing for many years. Diane was someone I respected so highly over the years, and appreciate the good work that you all are doing. And hopefully, Leesa, you're wanting to continue the relationship with Save the Manatee Club, but we want to continue to support. It's going to take all of us working together to make this a restoration reality.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So MRC has a lot of opportunities for young people to get engaged in volunteerism, either, active restoration or being a mentor for a student that's younger than you. I think we capped out for this summer our summer counselors, but I think that's an awesome opportunity for teenagers to get involved as a volunteer here. And then they can also be, kind of a mentor for a middle school or an elementary school student. And demonstrate, how to be a good environmental steward. And so we do restoration, we have education, and of course, with our Lagoon Watch monitoring and the science projects that we're doing, those are the types of things that teenagers can really learn a lot from, especially data collection. If your kid is interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, we have all kinds of data that can be analyzed and added, and we've got a set of really amazing sea turtle recovery data sheets, and they are literally sheets. They all need to be entered into some kind of a database. I mean, just all kinds of examples of opportunities of kids of different aptitudes that they can get involved with MRC. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one.
Did you come up with that?
No, I didn't. No, I won't take credit for that. Also, you can direct, if you have classrooms and everything, you can direct the kids to write their representatives as well. A bunch of kids as one loud voice, that can create a massive impact as well.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that in summer camp.
Yeah.
We're going to be writing to the Department of Interior.
Yeah. We just did that, and also help to support other organizations that are doing it. Again, this is something where we need everybody working together.
Right.
True. Yeah. We do have a few more questions, but I don't know how everybody else is holding up.
How are you guys doing out there?
Still going.
Yay.
Oh, okay. All right, let's see here. So, Pat, question for you. How do we reevaluate manatees getting back to the endangered list, upgraded from threatened?
Yeah, so thankfully, one of our co-founders, Bob Graham, and actually Jimmy Buffett too, both put out an op-ed recently asking for that. Bob had written one before, several years before they reclassified them, right before they reclassified them, saying it shouldn't happen. I will tell you that also the scientific advisors that were sought their official peer review, the majority felt that it was not justified. Another 200 some thousand people wrote them and told them it wasn't, and why. We told them specifically and scientifically why. And of course, when this all started really happen, I said, which I don't like to do a lot, I said, I told you so, because we've been talking about the science, we've been writing them, we've been doing the exposure for it. So they're probably, and we're asking them to do it. They're probably not going to stop and work on that right now. We're also asking them to upgrade the manatee's critical habitat, something they put off for years. And this would be better, in a better position if they had done more. We're asking them also in the meantime to reinitiate consultation with the EPA, because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, needs to be making sure that the EPA understands that they're going to hold the EPA's feet to the fire on water quality issues, because they can't just operate as if water quality is not important to manatees or other endangered and threatened species, because it is. It's fundamentally critical, as I think today's talks have demonstrated. So we're being quite aggressive on trying to make up for lost time over the last several years, when many of these agencies really were not even being allowed to meet their basic responsibilities. So we're saying no more excuses. You guys get together, you support one another, and demand that the laws be followed. And in fact, literally, that's part of our negotiations with the Fish and Wildlife Service right now. So if they take a little longer to look at whether or not they should be reclassified to endangered, even though it would be justified if they're doing these other things in the meantime to make a difference, then we'll be a little more patient with that reclassification. But we're going to keep asking for it. We're going to ask others to support that request, but we don't want they're working on that to stop them from doing things that will aid the recovery for manatees. One thing that I didn't say in my talk, which I usually try to work in, is that when manatees were first listed, really in the late 60s under the Red Book, the recovery potential, even though the population was under 1,000, the recovery potential was really high. And we just had to do some really basic things, and the manatees should then be able to begin recovering really dramatically, and they did. Well, now the recovery potential from a failure going forward is really, really small. If we make any more serious mistakes, we may never ever be able to recover them. Even though we're starting with a higher population number of 7,000 to 8,000, that could go down and be irreversible if in fact these ecosystems are collapsing, if Florida continues to grow unsustainably, and all these things that we've put off. So I try to really urge them that, mistake in the past is one thing, but mistakes going forward have really serious consequences, because when you add in climate change, sea level rise, what's going to happen to the warm water, artificial warm water sources, our springs. Anyway, I'm kind of going on and on, so I won't keep talking about it, but this is sort of, I don't want to call it a perfect storm. It's the unperfect storm of things coming together in such a way that we could see the collapses of additional ecosystems that, like I talked about earlier, whether it's Biscayne Bay or Sarasota Harbor or Charlotte Harbor rather, and Tampa Bay. So this needs to be that wake up call that tells them, get it together now.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat. That was an excellent question to end on. You covered a lot of bases, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and those especially online as well. Don't forget the things that you can do to help support the lagoon, reduce your impact on stormwater pollution, join Lagoon Loyal, check out Save the Manatee Club, and check out our website, savetheirl.org. So again, thank you so much to everyone for being here today.
Thank you.
And thank you all out there in Zoom world also for participating.
It's like 51 people held on, so thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. I'll talk to you in the
Thank
morning.
you.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here.